This is the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg. It's located directly across the street from the Strasburg Railroad. I'm going to share pictures I took during several trips there over the past several decades. I'll share some tidbits of information gleaned from Wikipedia and the museum's website. In 1939, the Pennsylvania Railroad gathered a collection of locomotives and displayed them at the New York World's Fair. When the fair was over, they moved them to a roundhouse in Northumberland, Pennsylvania. Then, in the late 60s, the state began making plans for this museum, and the equipment was moved to the Strasburg Railroad. You can see some of it while it was there in my video of the Strasburg Railroad from 1972. The museum opened in 1975, and the collection was moved across the street. One of the first locomotives in America was the John Bull. It was brought from England by one of Pennsylvania Railroad's predecessors. The Pennsy refurbished it for the 1876 U.S. Centennial in Philadelphia and donated it to the Smithsonian in 1884. They built this working replica in their Altoona shops in 1939 for their exhibit at the New York World's Fair. This 260 Mogul was built by Baldwin in 1875 for the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. Here's an H3 Class 280 consolidation built for the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1888. This is another consolidation, an H6 class built in 1905. Consolidations were the most numerous type of locomotives on American railroads. The Pennsylvania Railroad alone had over 3,000 of them. Yet another consolidation, this one an H10 built in 1915. This locomotive was built in 1902 as an E2 Class 442 Atlantic number 8063. Performance enhancements were made to this and the other E2s in about 1918, and they were reclassified as E7s. In 1905, an identical E2, number 7002, set an unverified land speed record of 127.1 miles an hour while on its way from New York to Chicago. The original 7002 was later scrapped, and this one was renumbered to represent it at the 1939 World's Fair. Here's another Atlantic, this one an E6 built in 1914. It's also a speed demon, famous for getting newsreel footage of Lindbergh landing in Washington, D.C. to screens in New York, faster than a competing airline could. Number 1223 is a D16 class. It's a classic 440 American built in 1905. It was refurbished and ran at Strasburg for a number of years, during which it appeared in the musical Hello, Dolly. Now it's retired and in the museum. This is a Shay built by Lima in 1906. You can see one running in my video from the Cass Railroad. By 1900, there had been a number of fires in wooden passenger cars caused by sparks from locomotives. This is a 1906 attempt at a steel car, but it's one of a kind because it contained too much combustible material. This one's a successful example of a steel car. The Pennsylvania Railroad was a leader in switching to steel. Small but mighty climax locomotives like this one had two steam cylinders attached to a transmission located under the center of the boiler. It sent power to drive shafts running to the front and rear trucks. This is a B6 060 switcher built in 1916. Another locomotive from 1916 is this L1 class Mikado. This one suffered a boiler explosion in 1942. Here's a little A5 class 040 switcher from 1917. Built in 1918, this is one of the few surviving Heisler locomotives. Notice the V-cylinder arrangement. You can see another one in operation in my Roaring Camp video. My favorite steam locomotive is the Pennsylvania Railroad K4. It's a 462 Pacific. It's also the official steam locomotive of our state. It was the line's premier passenger locomotive. 425 of them were built, but only 2 survive. Number 3570 was built in 1920. Number 3570 pulled President Harding's campaign train and his funeral train. A characteristic of many Pennsylvania Railroad locomotives is a bell pair firebox with a square top section. You can see how that affects the shape of the boiler shell near the cab. The design provides greater surface area at the top where the heat is greatest, improving heat transfer and steam production. G5 class 460 10-wheelers like this one, which was built in 1924, were used on commuter trains. With small wheels and no trailing truck, their power and traction let them get up to speed quickly. The absence of a trailing truck didn't affect stability at the relatively low speed of a commuter train. This is a B1 electric switcher. One of the oddest engines in the museum is this fireless steam locomotive, sometimes referred to as a thermos bottle. It would be filled with steam from a stationary boiler and would run around the yard for a couple of hours on each filling. The official electric locomotive of Pennsylvania is the GG1. It's another classic Pennsylvania Railroad engine, known for what we'd now refer to as its Art Deco design. This one was built in 1943. This is an E7 class diesel, built in 1945. As a boy, I'd have loved to have one of these in Santa Fe war bonnet livery for my Lionel train layout, instead of those clunky old steam engines. How we change as we get older. GP9s like this one, built in 1955, were a very popular type. EMD built over 4,000 of them. This GE E44A electric was one of the last electrics purchased by the Pennsy. It was taken out of service earlier than expected due to the PCBs in its oil. This self-propelled crane is one of the artifacts in the outdoor train yard. Here's an observation car from the Reading Crusader. This 284 Berkshire was built in 1944. I'm not sure what it was doing in Pennsylvania for all those years, but I understand it's now gone back to Ohio. My railfan grandsons patiently toured the exhibits with me, but I think their favorite section was Stewart Junction, where there were trains for them to play with.